Hi, everybody. So welcome to Accessibility New York City. We're going to get started. Thank you for coming. Thank you for everybody watching. Quick thanks to those who go to make this happen. So thank you, huge thank you to Thoughtbot for providing this awesome space and everything that we can actually project and hook up to the outside world. Very much appreciated. And thank you to the Internet Society of New York, who are helping us with the live stream and help us get these videos onto our YouTube channel. And my name is Sean. I'm one of the organizers here. And thank you, huge thank you to Jack Chen for joining us this evening and giving tonight's presentation. So take it away, Jack.
Thank you, Sean. Really glad to have an opportunity to talk about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart, which is the topic of disability and success and understanding what the success factors are for people with disabilities. So just some house rules. I am completely blind, so if you raise your hand, you may have it up for a really long time before I call on you. So please don't be afraid to shout out. I won't be offended at all. No problem with that at all. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's go to advance to slide 4, Sean. Yeah. Okay. And so for anybody out there who needs a HTML version of the slide deck, you can go to my website to find it, and I'll give you the URL. It's www.teamexcelability, teamexcelability.com/pubs, and you'll see the link to today's presentation there, the HTML version. So, and I think Sean also tweeted it out, so if anyone needs that, then that's available. Okay. So just a real quick introduction to who I am. I am a lawyer at Google. I've been at Google now for 6 years, working in 2 areas. First in patent law for the first 4 years, and then now as product counsel for Chromebooks and Chrome OS. And I was the product counsel for our Internet of Things platform. So that's kind of just more general legal issues that I deal with on those platforms. So I was born legally blind. I lost my eyesight, the remaining eyesight, when I was 16 in an eye operation that just didn't go right. I have my BA from Harvard in computer science and my master's in computer science from UC Berkeley. And I became a lawyer in 2005. I'm going to skip from slide 5. I just have a picture there of some recent athletic things I've done in climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. And then slide 6, I have a picture of me when I did the New York City Ironman in 2012. So happy to talk about any of those things with folks afterwards, but I'm not sure that's why you came here today. So let's go to slide 7. So the topic of today we're going to start out with is, what is success? So I'm curious to hear what people, without reading the slide, think success is. So what is success? Anyone can shout out. I'll repeat it for the live stream.
Fulfilling livelihood.
Fulfilling livelihood, good.
Making Google the best place to work for people.
Oh yeah, that's, I know. That's making Google the best place to work. I know.
Achieving a goal.
Achieving a goal, awesome.
An exit for our entrepreneurial company, and a scientific award to boot.
Fantastic. Well, okay, so here's my definition of success, partially taken from Merriam-Webster. And it is obtaining the desired result of something attempted in the face of challenges. So I'm going to repeat it one more time. Obtaining a desired result for something attempted in the face of challenges. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not the authority on success. Let's just put it that way. I have been very fortunate to have had a lot of great experiences in my life, but I am nowhere near, in my mind, having achieved success. So this is some of my musings and some of my research what I'm going to share with you. So the desired result. So here's a thought exercise for you. You don't have to say it out loud. But what is your goal? What is your desired result in life? It's important for us to think about that every once in a while to figure, where do I want to end up at the end of my life? Or what things would I want to look back on and say, yeah, that made me successful, or I considered my life to be successful. So I'm going to ask you to just take 20 seconds and think of something that would make you feel fulfilled. Okay, I'm not sure that was 20 seconds, but I'm just going to give you a sense of what some of mine are. I have 2 young kids, so being a great dad is one. Inventing some breakthrough technology. I've always been an inventor, so I love inventing technology. I'd love to be general counsel somewhere, if that is kind of the path that's forward for me. Finish the Hawaii Ironman. Now that's maybe, I don't know. We'll see if I ever get there. Become a certified financial planner in retirement. So I've got lots of interests, lots of goals, and you may also be the same way. Okay, let's go to slide number 8. So now that you've thought about what your desired result is, let's look at in the face of challenges, right? Because if there wasn't a challenge to be,
Projector just fell off.
uh-oh.
And we're back. All right,
Okay.
carry on.
So if there weren't any challenges, then this would be a pretty easy thing. But I imagine for most of you, if you've got a desired result in life, there's got to be some challenges along the way, right? So some examples, it might be self-esteem, or maybe English as a second language, stage fright. In my case, disability is one of the things that is a big challenge for me on a day-to-day basis. And we can talk a lot more about what some of those challenges are, but disability is a big challenge for me. And so now you know what your goals are and what could hold you back. Let's look at some of the things that amazing people have done who have disabilities, and let's see what's actually really made them successful. So just before we jump into that, I'm going to give you a little background in terms of how I came up with this topic and this talk, which about 3.5 years ago or so, I became really fascinated in reading autobiographies of people with disabilities. And as I started reading more and more of them, I started realizing there were a lot of commonalities in their stories. And so I wanted to be able to capture some of those commonalities and bring it forward in a way where it's actionable. And so I started realizing, wow, there are these several factors, or a number of factors that people are saying over and over again across various disciplines, whether it's athletics or arts or education, whatever it might be. And so I charted those success factors across about 50 different individuals just in my own book research. So 70 factors across 50 people, and tried to find out what are the most common. And so what I'm going to share with you today is a little sneak peek into what I found as the most common success factors. So just stop there if anyone has any questions. I'm going to just see if anyone has questions now.
Well, Jack, this is Sarah.
Yeah?
I'm just thinking, kind of by definition, when you are reading books about enormously successful people, it's a very selected set.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering whether actually, even if you went outside of the realm of disabilities, once you're just reading autobiographies of the phenomenally successful, they probably all share characteristics.
That's true. I think that's absolutely right. But I think that what people with disabilities have to teach us is an interesting angle to some of these characteristics that we've not really explored before, or maybe it's been explored, but not in this way. But I wanted to look at, because I do believe that people with disabilities have unique challenges, but also unique gifts to share with the world. So that's the angle that I wanted to take this particular set of research. It was a great question, though. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce you quickly to some of the folks that I did research on, and just so you get a sense of who they are, because they'll become relevant in the presentation later on. So Alicia Alonso, and there's a picture of her. So. Next slide. So I'm sorry. Yes, slide 9. Alicia Alonso, very famous ballerina. She lost her eyesight and became completely blind, but still was able to dance. Okay, she danced with the American Ballet Company. Ray Charles, People probably know who he is. Major pop star, also totally blind. Michael J. Fox, also probably someone who people know. He has Parkinson's disease and still was able to film and do his shows after he was diagnosed and after he suffered the consequences of that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, Temple Grandin. People might not know who she is, but 1/3 of all of the meat processing plants in the world were created by her designs. She's has autism. Okay, and she was also named one of the 100 most influential people in the New York Times, which is pretty amazing. Jim Abbott, baseball player for the New York Yankees, one arm. John Hockenberry, he is a journalist or former journalist with NPR, I believe it was This American Life, I think, in a wheelchair. Okay, let's go to slide number 11. Eric Weinmeier, totally blind, first person to climb all 7 summits on the 7 continents, highest 7 summits on the 7 continents. David Hartman, also visually impaired, first person to graduate from medical school in the United States. Byron Pitts, correspondent for NBC and ABC. He's a stutterer. That's pretty amazing to me, a journalist who's a stutterer. Amazing. Okay, slide 12. Richard Branson, his dyslexia, the founder of Virgin, which is over 400 companies. This is pretty amazing. Mark Wellman, he lost the use of his lower legs, spinal injury in a climbing accident, but he's climbed Half Dome in California with just using his arms. John Elder Robinson, he has Asperger's and created the smoking effect used by KISS. Okay, slide 13. Marla Runyan, first visually impaired person to compete in the Olympics. And Jean Little, author who's visually impaired, who's also written about 44 books and won many awards. So I know that was a huge run through the kind of Hall of Fame of maybe people who have disabilities. But what I wanted to do next, in the next topic here, is to look at some of the most common success factors and then look at these individuals and kind of explain their exemplification of some of these success factors. Okay, before we get to that, I actually realized there's a slide. I missed slide 14. After doing that book research, I also then recently have launched a podcast, which is at my site, which I said before, which is www.teamexcelability.com, which kind of explored the same topic with today's disabled leaders, right? So I've interviewed about 7 individuals so far and asked them the same questions, essentially like, what are the things that helped you be successful? So Vint Cerf, who is the father of the internet, who's hearing impaired, his own person I've interviewed. Steve Letness, who's blind and a film composer, someone I've interviewed. And then a number of CEOs with varying disabilities from blindness to dyslexia to stuttering. So if you're interested in that topic, feel free to check out those resources. Okay, so we're gonna go now to the success factors. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, slide 15. Boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear. So boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear. That was probably the most valuable success factor for people with disabilities. And just to give you some context for me on my kind of day-to-day life when I have a disability, and how it happened to me. So I lost my eyesight when I was 16 through an eye operation, and at the time, it was at the time when they were just beginning to do DNA matching for corneas, and I was kind of one of the first people to get one of these surgeries. And during the surgery, there was hemorrhaging, and it left me completely blind. And my context for going into the surgery was, I thought, oh wow, after the surgery, I'm going to be able to drive, I'm going to be able to read, I'm going to be able to see the faces of my family and friends. And it just didn't turn out to be that way. And it put me into this really awful place where I felt like there was no possibility or no future of success for me at all. And so when I think back to my own life about boldness and facing uncertainty, this was kind of my turning point. But I want to talk about some of the other people who I've read about. So Alicia Alonso. So she's the one who is the ballerina who became blind during her career. And it started happening slowly for her, and her doctors told her, you shouldn't continue to dance. And for her, initially, she thought about it and decided that, well, if I can't dance, then what is there to do in life? And so in the face of possible full detachment of her retina, she continued to dance, right? And she continued to excel at what she did. But there was great fear for her that she would not only lose her livelihood, but she'd lose the remaining sight that she had. Okay. Ray Charles is another one. This guy was incredible. When he was 12 years old, he rode a motorcycle. He lost his eyesight when he was 3, and when he was 12 years old, he rode around the streets on a motorcycle by himself. I don't know how that's possible. There's a lot of fear in that for me. So, and later on in life, when he would travel to various places, he did not have a guide. He didn't even use a cane, but he would walk around the streets just by using his ears and be able to navigate. You can imagine how frightening that might be. So Jim Abbott, when he was 12 years old, and mind you, he only has one arm as a baseball player, he said in a newspaper article, I want to be a Major League Baseball player. And for someone who has one arm, to say that, it takes incredible courage, and to say it on the media, for that matter. Yes, he was proved right. And the final person is Mark Wellman. And Sean's going to read a quote. I don't know if you'll be able to catch this on the live stream. I guess if you're standing close to me or talk loudly, you'll be able to hear it. So, sorry, Mark Wellman is the individual who lost the use of his legs and a spinal injury while he was hiking and was able to ascend El Capitan just by using his arms.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I had built a nice life for myself as a ranger, but I yearned to throw myself into something big and uncertain with no turning back. I wanted to face new adversity and challenge and wanted to live and breathe with it.
So for him, he wasn't satisfied just doing kind of ordinary things. Ordinary things meaning that he was able to get a job at Yosemite being a ranger. But he wanted more, to do more. And, not having any idea how he was going to climb this basically vertical face without the use of his legs, it's pretty incredible. Boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear, and certainly a lot of uncertainty there for Mark Wellman. So I want to take a pause for a second again and ask you guys to think a little bit about the desired result we had talked about before, and ask yourself, what is there in my own experience where I may need to have boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear? What is that for you? And I'll talk a little bit about what it is for me on the next slide. So when I was in elementary school, I had a teacher who told me essentially, because I was getting really stressed out about not being able to do well or to finish my assignment, she said, you know what, you don't really have to work that hard, because you know what, the government will just take care of you. All right. And so, what was that? What was I supposed to do with that? And so, that was a major turning point in my own life to start thinking about like the uncertainty of what life would hold. And this is way before I lost the remaining eyesight. I think that for some of us, uncertainty becomes less fearful but more practical. And what I mean by that is, for me, when I decide there's something I want to do, a new challenge, I never think I'm not going to be able to do that. The first thought that always comes to mind is how. It's not whether, or it's not no way, but it's always how. And I'll give you a simple example of that. That's not on the slide. When I was about 10 years ago, I decided I really wanted to do an Ironman triathlon, which, if you don't know, is 2.5 miles of swimming, plus 112 miles of biking, and a full marathon, all back to back. Right? It takes about 15 hours, 12 to 15 hours, something like that. And I couldn't swim. And so, but not being deterred, I read a bunch of articles online. Without the benefit of being able to see the pictures or the videos. And I went to the pool, and I jumped in as a 30-something-year-old guy, holding on to the side of the pool, learning how to kick. It was incredibly embarrassing, but I wasn't deterred, right? So this is what I'm, the point I want to make is, it's for me, I've kind of taken to heart this particular factor, because now it's never about whether I could do something, but only how am I going to get it done. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear. Okay, let's go to slide 17. The second factor, help and support from a strong advocate. Okay? Seems kind of obvious, right? But I think that for people with disabilities, it is incredibly useful to have this support and advocate. So I'll give you a few examples. Byron Pitts, remember the guy who stutters, who's a journalist for NBC and ABC. Okay, they thought he had a severe learning disability because he couldn't talk. And when he was in junior high school, his mom was still teaching him the ABCs. And here's a quote from that period, which he said in his book.
Learning to recognize and sound out letters. What I should have learned at age 4, I was finally getting at age 11.
Yep.
The session was occasionally interrupted by my uncontrollable tears. I cried in hysterics. I'm almost in high school and I'm studying the alphabet. I really am a moron. People will laugh at me. I'll never catch up. My mother reassured me, you're not a moron. Son, it doesn't matter how you start, only how you finish. You can do this.
Yeah. And for most people, your parents are your greatest support and advocate. I'll share a little bit of how that worked for me, but not always. So for Temple Grandin, she really had two. Temple Grandin is the woman who, with autism, who has designed most of the meat processing plants in the world, or at least a third of them. Okay. So her mother was very instrumental as a help and support for her. But her high school science teacher, was the one who really brought her out of her shell. And what I mean by that is, for Temple Grandin, she was just not comfortable around people. She couldn't speak in the right way, and she always felt very isolated because of her quote-unquote strange behaviors. Her science teacher in high school recognized in her that she had, of what the challenges she had, and challenged her to find out what the scientific solution to that would be, right? And gave her the flexibility and the support. She created what she calls a squeeze machine, which for someone who has autism, and I don't, so I don't know this, but she says that feeling someone kind of hugging you, even though she didn't like human contact, having a machine do that for you, she was able to gain calm and control over her life. And so her high school teacher challenged her with this project and supported her the whole way through. Okay. Jean Little, another quote. She's the blind author of over 44 books.
Quote time.
Yep.
You do have bad eyes, she said, but you go right ahead and climb the tree.
Right. So this is a situation in which friends were telling her and making fun of her when she was younger that she had bad eyes. And so she was prevented from playing with other kids. And what did her mother do? Rather than shrink in fear that her child was going to kill herself falling out of a tree, she said, go ahead and do it. Because she was Jean's own advocate for herself, or against herself, if you will. So just a few examples of folks who have been helps and supports and advocates for people who have disabilities. So for all of us, most of us have gone, we've all gone through our younger years, and whether or not our parents were our best advocates, the question still remains, if that's not something that we have, who can it be? Who is someone that can be in your corner that you can get to support and advocate for you? It could be a manager. It could be someone in a disability-related organization. It could be someone in this room. But the quote-unquote research has shown that having a support and an advocate is an incredibly valuable asset to have in terms of finding success. Okay, so as you think about who that might be for you, I'll give you a little bit of example for me. So when I was going through elementary school and my grades were not very good, my mom recognized that it wasn't because I was stupid, but it was because the situation that I was in, where I was having to get materials and formats and things that I wasn't able to get them in, and then getting frustrated. At the same time that my grades weren't very good, she fought to get me into the gifted and talented programs in the school. And she won. And so I was able to go from being a C student in 5th grade to being gifted and talented in the gifted and talented program in 7th grade. And so she was my biggest advocate. Okay, so let's go to the third factor in slide 19. Acting as non-disabled as possible. Now I think that this may rub some people the wrong way.
Slide 19, you say?
19.
Oops, sorry.
Yep.
Here we are.
Yep, okay. So acting as non-disabled as possible. Okay, so like I said, this may rub some people the wrong way. I'm not apologizing for the research, but this is one of the key things that I found about people with disabilities in terms of how they find success. Here's a few examples. Michael J. Fox. I think it was around the time he was still filming Family Ties and had just finished the Back to the Future movies and was about to, or was at the end of the first season of Spin City. Then he realized that he had this uncontrollable tremor, that he couldn't control his hands or his feet. So what did he do? He found ways to hide his tremors, right, from the camera, because he wanted people to see him for the funny person that he was and not see kind of this quote-unquote ugly side. He would jam his hands into his pockets. He would, twirl a pen to kind of distract his brain. So if you go back to watch episodes of Spin City, you may actually see this. He may lean against a wall to prevent himself from shaking. All these kinds of things. He found ways to hide his what was happening to him. Marla Runyon. Okay, so she's the one who was the visually impaired person who was in the Olympics. So when she was in high school, she would have her parents or her friends go to school with her before school started so that she could learn and memorize where all of her classes were. So she never had to face that issue where, oh my goodness, here's my class schedule. I have no idea where room 110 is. She knew ahead of time so she could act like she knew what she was doing. On her prom night, they went out to a restaurant. And not wanting her date to know that she had a disability, she picked up a copy of the menu from the restaurant and memorized it. So that when she got to the restaurant, she could basically pick up the menu, act like she could read it, and then order from it. Okay. So she always wanted to compete on her merits and not have anyone sort of assume anything about her because of her vision loss. So here's a quote from Marla.
You can use any term you like, but it doesn't define me. In the end, it's my responsibility to ensure that the attributes by which I would prefer to be defined are more visible to you than my blindness.
Yeah. So going to slide 20. For me, it's really just about not allowing someone to pigeonhole you and make judgments about your capabilities before you're able to demonstrate what your capabilities are. Right? I'll give you a good example of this. For the most part, when I've applied to jobs, especially at law firms, I never disclosed up front that I had a disability. I wanted them to invite me in for an interview without them actually having made this judgment about what I could do or couldn't do, right? For me, it was always about, okay, let me, because once I walked in the door, it would be really hard for them to throw me out, right? So I figured I always wanted that fair shot, and if they threw me out, fine, So there is one caveat to that, which I will tell you a funny story. The only job where I actually ever disclosed that I had a disability ahead of time was the job I had the interview I had at Google. And knowing that Google was such an interesting company, I really wanted to make my application stand out. And so I had just completed the New York City Triathlon like a week or two before I had found the posting for a patent attorney. And so I actually attached a newspaper article that was written about me. And this kind of goes to the same point about not wanting people to pigeonhole you for what you can do. What I did instead of hiding it was I led off with what my capabilities were, or tried to break those stereotypes of what people thought my capabilities were by putting in an article about someone who's visually impaired who does a triathlon, who's now applying for a job as a patent attorney at Google. And I guess it worked. So, okay. All right, so let's go to slide 21 for the final factor. Disability is an advantage. And this is probably my favorite factor to talk about, because I do believe that people with disabilities have very unique and distinct advantages to bring to the table, no matter what they're doing. So let's look at a few examples of different people. So Ray Charles, everyone knows he's a singer. But I don't know if you guys know that he actually had his own plane and is actually able to fix his own plane by not being able to see. And one of the advantages that he had is that he could reach his arm up into the engine and replace parts without actually having to take the engine apart, saving an incredible amount of time and cost. So just an interesting tidbit for an advantage that he had. Temple Grandin. So her extreme advantage in terms of her disability is that she could remember every part, every plant that she has ever created. And not only that, but she could actually mix and match those parts to create new plants. And she can also take those designs, turn them in 3D, slice them and dice them in all different kinds of ways that she could create in her mind almost like a CAD tool on steroids, right? So, and this is the same for other people I've talked to who have other disabilities. One of the individuals I interviewed for my podcast, his name is Steve Walker. He's a creator. He's a CEO of his own company, which he sold, called New England Wood Pellet Company, that made wood pellet stoves. At the height, they had about 100,000 customers in the Northeast. He could walk into a manufacturing plant and he could tell you in real time exactly what every part was doing because he could just think that way, right? So extreme advantage for him because he made a lot of his money mainly because he was able to create efficiencies in manufacturing process. Okay. John Hockenberry, another favorite person I love to talk about this in terms of this factor. He's the wheelchair-bound journalist for NPR. So during the Palestinian uprising, which happened, I forget what decade, I'm not a historian, so I don't know, but at the time there was a curfew in the country. And John was the kind of person who didn't like to have to obey curfews. So what he did was he went out in the street, but nobody stopped him. Police didn't stop him. Army didn't stop him. Nobody stopped him. And the main reason for that was because he wasn't a threat, right? He also didn't look like a journalist. So when he actually got to the place where there were people gathered, he would take out his tape recorder and he'd start recording. No one would think anything of it because he didn't look like a journalist. So he used his disability in incredible ways to get the scoops on stories, and that's one of the reasons why he became so successful. So, Richard Branson, he was able to, again, focus on the big picture in his businesses, not getting bogged down in the details, and able to advance the companies because he was able to see things from the 5,000-foot view. John Elder Robinson, Asperger's, he was the guy who created the smoking effect for KISS. Okay, so his greatest advantage is his amazing ability to have concentration. He once applied for a digital design job and he had no idea how to do digital design at all. So what did he do? He bought a couple books and read them. In 8 days, became an expert in digital design because of his ability to concentrate. So here's a quote from him about his own abilities and advantages.
Luckily, the world is also full of people who care about results, and those people are usually very happy with me because my Asperger's compels me to be the ultimate expert in whatever field of interest I choose. And with substantial knowledge, I can obtain good results.
I'm going to give you a couple more examples from people that I've interviewed for the podcast. Vint Cerf is the father of the internet, who's hearing impaired. And he said in the podcast that being hearing impaired probably is one of the factors that led him to work on electronic communications because it was easier for him to type and communicate with people than it was to sit down and have a conversation. So where would we be today if Vint Cerf hadn't been hearing impaired? And where would the internet be today? One example. Another example is Steve Letness. Steve Letness is a blind film composer. Get that. He's supposed to take a visual reel of footage and create music for it, right? So what is his advantage? Well, Steve's ability to concentrate on and not get bogged down again in all of the detail of the film and simply concentrate on the mood that he's trying to set and the music he's trying to produce actually makes him a better composer. So he used his visual disability to help him to create music. And I'm going to take a little bit of a detour to talk about one of the reasons why I think that people with disabilities have an extreme advantage when it comes to pretty much doing anything, and it's embodied in it's embodied in a vanilla orchid plant. So I also interviewed a guy named Dan Berlin, who, when he lost his eyesight, moved to Colorado, purchased a vanilla company, and decided to try to create or to make vanilla, right? So anyway, his story is that the way vanilla grows, it grows on an orchid vine, and it grows best in the shade. And so, but the way that you create, you increase the productivity of vanilla is to put extreme stress on the plant. How do they do that? Well, some people will take away the shade and put the orchid plant in hot and great sun, in strong sunlight. Some people will starve it of food. Some people will starve it of water. Some people will prune it until it's pretty much nothing. But what the plant does is it goes into fight back mode, and it produces, I don't know, 30-fold of vanilla beans. Right? You create a great harvest of vanilla. And the analogy for us is that what do we as people think of when we think stress is coming my way? Well, one thing is for sure is that if you have a disability, because your experience with life is very different than the experience of everybody else, and the world is quite honestly not made for you, what does that bring on? Extreme stress. But what does the vanilla plant show us? Is that if we deal with extreme stress, there can be extreme results, right? So extreme stress, if it's dealt right, can bring about extreme results. And one great example of this, a very practical one, is problem solving, right? So people who have disabilities on a day-to-day basis have to problem solve, right? For me, I problem solve all the time. I walk around with a cane, and I can only see about, or quote unquote, see about 3 feet in front of me. So I'm always processing information on a 3-foot radius, right? So the problem solving happens for me every day. And that's made me an extremely patient and problem solver who, isn't afraid to take on any kind of challenge, right? So Dan's perspective, and one that I've come to agree with him on, is that companies today want people who are great problem solvers, and hiring someone with a disability is a great way to find someone who is a great problem solver. So thinking about maybe your own challenge, your desired result, and what the challenge you're facing, what's an advantage that you have because of your challenge that you can bring to the table? It's a question that we all think about because it can yield great results if we're able to deal with, if we're able to find out what our advantage is and to bring it to bear to get those desired results. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples for me of some of the advantages I found from my own life. So because I can't see someone's facial expressions, I have to pay attention to their voice a lot more. And one of the things that people focus on who have sight is they focus on their facial expressions a lot more than they focus on what they're saying. So in a negotiation, and especially a legal negotiation, there's a lot of information that gets put on the table when in terms of the way someone says something, the words that they choose. I can tell a lot about their emotional state based on what they're telling me. And so I use that to my advantage when I'm negotiating a deal. So at the same time, because I'm also able to control the way I speak, I'm also able to put people at ease in the negotiation so that they're not coming into the negotiation with their backup. So that's kind of one of the advantages that I find for me in my daily practice. I'm going to end just by kind of reiterating what the 4 success factors are on slide 23, what the 4 success factors are that we've been talking about today. And there are more, but I just figured that we had time only for these few. So boldness in the face of uncertainty and fear, help and support from a strong advocate, acting as non-disabled as possible, or to put it a different way, being able to frame your capabilities in the way that you want people to see them, and disability as an advantage. So those are the 4 factors, and probably the four most prominent factors that I found in my research in terms of what are the success factors for people with disabilities. And just in closing, if this is a topic that you're really interested in, I've kind of got two areas that I want to take this that you can all be hopefully watching out for. First is the podcast, which I mentioned. I am in the process of recording more episodes, but I think that the fact that there are people today who can talk about these topics and success factors, who you can relate to and who you may have heard of, it's really instructive. I highly encourage you guys to go check it out. www.teamexcelability.com. And then the other one is that eventually I hope to be able to turn these success factors into a longer form piece, like a book, highlighting the various success factors, telling the stories kind of like what we talked about today, and giving people an opportunity to explore their own life, because I think that the people with disabilities can teach all of us a whole lot about how to be successful and the success factors that they've demonstrated in their own life. So that's kind of the end of my presentation, and if folks have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, Sveta has a question, and I'm going to do my best to interpret. So I want caption for things. I'm a deaf person myself. And I noticed you capturing your words hearing impaired. So many of the deaf people don't prefer that and prefer hard of hearing, not hearing impaired.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing, so acting like you don't have a disability? Okay, sorry. Oh, the previous slide, let me back up. So it says acting as non-disabled as possible. I don't agree with that. I personally, as a deaf person, I disagree with that quote because as a deaf person, I can't act like I don't have like a hearing person. I depend on visual access, like lip reading, captioning, signing. So it doesn't matter about a hearing implant. I can't act like a hearing person.
Two very good points.
1 second.
Oh, go ahead.
We can't behave like we're not disabled. We just behave like ourselves. We act to the best of our abilities. So I just disagree with that quote. Okay.
Yep. And that's a perfectly fair and valid point to have. I absolutely agree that it's right that you should act the way that you are. I think that the individuals who we have kind of highlighted and talked about here have found it to be particularly useful and valuable for them to be able to frame their capabilities in a way that people don't judge them. And I think that's the greater point, is that because the world is not yet at a state where it is willing to look past physical disabilities, especially, I think there is a gap. And the gap is the way that people think about people with disabilities. I wish it weren't that way, but unfortunately it is. And so the thing that the aspect that these people are teaching us, these individuals who've achieved great success, they're saying, I want people to interact with me the way that I see myself, right? A very capable and a very capable person. So finding a way to help the world to evaluate you on your own capabilities without making value judgments is really the point of that aspect of it.
I just want to add something quick to that.
Sure.
Just as an example, I think of kind of not matching that quote, but matching Morris Feta's point. When you applied for Google,
Yep.
I mean, you put your blindness kind of front and center, but you also put kind of, I'm not sure how to phrase this because I'm really tired because I just flew back home. Almost like an off-putting badassery front and center. To be like, yeah, here's my resume, I'm a lawyer, also I'm blind and just did an Ironman. What did you do today? Okay, we got a question from the internet.
Okay.
How do we reconcile, quote, acting as non-disabled, unquote, with needing role models?
With needing role models.
Yeah, so that's,
Oh, I see.
guess the point with
Yes.
the strong advocate as well as the point of acting non-disabled.
Well, I think that there are various situations and timing when acting non-disabled is very useful. You know, I'll say it this way. Certainly, when people get to know me well, I know that they're going to evaluate me or continue to evaluate me on my own merits. I think it's absolutely right and appropriate to really start talking about your disability. Vint Cerf had an interesting quote about this when we were talking about disclosure of your disability, and he said that he prefers to disclose, certainly for the main reason that he doesn't want people to think he's stupid, just that he is hearing loss. And the point there really is that there are times to disclose, and I think times not to talk about your disability or from what these individuals are saying. And mainly for me, the times when I've decided not to initiate the discussion that I have a disability is the first time that I'm meeting someone. So I find email to be a particularly valuable way of doing that. Temple Grandin was the same way. So she had a lot of difficulty communicating with people because of her disability. The social aspect was tough for her. So the way she dealt with it was she always let off when she was looking for a job or looking to do some kind of speaking or some kind of proposal. She always let off with a written proposal. She never called the person directly. She always led off with a written proposal because that helped her put her work before somebody so that they could evaluate her capabilities just for what they were. And so I know that this is a particularly contentious point. I just encourage folks to think about it more, and you certainly don't have to agree with this. I think that some of these individuals have just shown us that that's how they managed to find success in their life.
So I hate to belabor this point, but for people that can't hide their disability, people that use a wheelchair or have a very visible disability, if they are going to a job interview, for instance, and need to make sure that the building is accessible to them, how can they not disclose it up front?
It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. I haven't had to think about that issue. It's a great question. I don't know. I haven't thought about that yet.
And now, actually, if I could just sort of speak
Yeah.
on behalf of Google, people could feel absolutely free, and indeed, are strongly encouraged to, divulge as much as possible in the entirely comfortable that that's not going to in any way factor into any judgment. Of course, so to the extent that you have that level of control about where you are going, say, to interview, obviously there are going to be some places with a reputation of embracing
Sarah.
diversity more than others.
If you could speak toward the mic.
Oh.
I'm not sure what parts of that came through, but most of it did.
Okay.
If you were done, then that was most
Yeah,
of it.
I'm done.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, okay. Personally believe that about advocates for accessibility because people with disabilities have the right for full and equal access. For example, about people who speak foreign languages, you can't hide that. I speak Russian, I speak another language. I don't have a hearing aid. Talking about people in general, sorry, my bad. With a foreign language, here people will translate for people speaking other languages. So why not make the world accessible for people with disabilities? It's the same concept. It's the same right. We don't have access for our own country. Why do we have to make access to people who speak other languages translating? But our own citizens with disabilities don't have the same access. It doesn't make sense. I personally feel embarrassed about itself disability. Personally feel you don't need to be embarrassed about your own disability. Every person, like you mentioned, every person with a disability has a unique ability, right? So show that. You don't need to hide the disability. You have to act like a disabled person. Act like yourself. If you have a specific disability, there's nothing wrong to request for access to fit your needs. And I stepped on the captions. There we go. Please.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Okay.
Finished. Okay.
One more?
I
Just
have
that's a microphone.
two issues, but maybe you will repeat for me because writer will not understand.
So I have two
First
issues.
issue is that I once made presentation on the conference for accessibility.
Well, if we could have the captions so that it could show up on the live stream, that would be best.
No, you
'cause-
can't, but you can repeat after me.
We have to
Can you repeat after me? At this conference
At this
for people
conference.
with accessibility,
for people with accessibility interest,
I suggested
I suggested
if you want people with disability to be successful,
if you want people with disabilities to
train
be
them
successful,
as children,
train them as children,
like you train people for sport in Olympic.
like you train people for sports in the Olympics.
Only if you train them
Only if you train
to be
them
much better than others,
to be much better than others,
you can hope they will succeed equality with others.
You could hope that they could succeed in a way that's equivalent to others.
What I suggested is this,
When I suggested
at
this
the conference,
at the conference,
people with disability were insulted with my suggestion.
people with disabilities were
All
insulted with my
people
suggestion.
without disability supported my suggestion.
People without disabilities supported the
But
suggestion.
all people with disability were very angry at me.
But
And
people
I
with
never
disabilities
repeated this
were very
suggestion
angry at him.
again.
So he never
Like,
repeated
it's
it again.
politically incorrect to tell
Politically
this.
incorrect to say this,
But this is truth.
but this is truth.
So families that train their children
So families that train their children
and try to develop their additional abilities.
and try to develop their
the
additional
Olympic
abilities,
sport people.
like an
You
Olympic
train
athlete,
musician 20 hours per day
you
to
train a
be
musician
successful
20 hours a day to be
musician.
successful as a musician.
So these people with disability usually more successful.
So that's one of the reasons people with disabilities can be
Maybe
more
you tell me
successful.
what you think about this, then I'll tell second thing.
So maybe you'll tell Dimitri what you think about this, and then he'll tell you a second thing. So he already has his answer prepared for you.
Just a quick question to that. What if you got your disability as an adult?
Quick question, what if you have your disability as an adult?
That's for Dimitri.
I do not hear at all. I have zero hearing.
I don't hear at all. I have zero hearing. But the question to you, Dimitri, was, what about
I
somebody who
lost hearing when I was 1 year old.
But what about somebody who gets their disability later in life? How do you manage what you just now said about intensive training, 20 hours a day?
I'm not solving for everybody.
I'm not solving
I'm
it for
just
everybody.
telling about children.
I'm just saying about children.
So if children happen to have disability,
If children
I have
happen to
suggested
have a
to their
disability,
parents,
I would suggest this to the
train
parents.
them like
them.
a trained musician
Like
to
you train a
become top
musician to
musician.
become the top musician,
Person who win Olympics.
a person who could win the
They need
Olympics.
to excel in something.
They need to
but
really
train
excel
them
in something.
day and night.
Train them day and night.
But again, this is politically incorrect thing
But this is
to
a politically
tell.
incorrect thing to say.
Repeat this.
I did.
So I cannot solve the contradiction. To win,
I
you
can't
need to
solve
be
the contradiction.
politically incorrect.
Sometimes to
Tell
win, you
him
need to be politically
what
incorrect.
spoken here. John. He suggested politically incorrect things.
Just like what Jack
But
said, he
this is
suggested
truthful
politically
things.
incorrect things, but they're truthful things.
So quick sanity check on time. We have about 10 minutes left, so we should probably get into the last couple of questions.
I wonder what Jack's response is to Dimitri's politically incorrect statement.
Yep. So response to Dimitri's statement, or response to the fact that about talking about political correctness.
No, just to Dimitri's opinion.
Yeah. I have a couple of interesting thoughts on that. Number one is what does a parent train their child in? Because a person who, how does a parent begin to think about what to train their child in? Do they train them in what they're already good at? Or do they find something, for example, let me give an example. If somebody is visually impaired, do you naturally train them to be a good singer or pianist because that's an area where they can excel? Or do you train them to be a pilot because that's not something that they should ordinarily, they're able to do? I agree with the proposition that all parents should train their children to do such and such, right? No problem with that. I grew up in a culture where that was very much looked up on. But the question is, what do you train them in, and what limitations do you put on their life if you train them?
My answer is you are right.
My
You
answer
try
is you're
to
right.
identify the child's best talent.
You try to identify the child's best talent,
Then train him for this talent.
train him for this
to
talent.
the very, very top.
To the very,
so
very top.
for blind people,
So for blind
if you
people.
have good voice,
If he has a good
train
voice,
him become top singer.
train him to become top singer.
If he good musician, train him
If he's a
become
good
to good
musician,
musician.
train him to be a good musician.
And if he wants to play baseball as a one-arm pitcher, he should
No.
get training to be a one-arm pitcher, right? So I think that the challenge is this.
Yes, yeah, but in just cruel reality of life, you
just a
need to
cruel
train
right of life.
children
You need to-
hard.
Train the children hard.
But my other just short remark,
My other short remark,
it partly due to my discussion with Sarah.
due to my discussion
I
with Sarah,
suggested, Sarah,
I
if
suggested
you
to Sarah,
classify
if you
disabilities,
can survive disabilities,
which is harder to success
which is harder for
and
success,
which is easy, my
which is easy,
opinion,
my opinion,
total deafness is disability
Total
which is
deafness
most hard to get success.
is the
And
disability that's hardest
I
to get
see
success.
some argument for this in
And
your
I see some
presentation.
argument for this
There are
even
no
in your
one deaf
presentation.
people in your presentation.
There's not one deaf person in your presentation.
It's a great point. The people who, I think that doesn't show that so this presentation isn't meant to be all of the people. There were about 50 individuals who took part in this research. A couple of the deaf individuals, Marley Matlin had an autobiography in there. She's the main one that I remember. Though through the podcast, there have been a number of individuals with hearing loss. Vint Cerf is one. Another one is of one who's coming up in the future, Richard Brown, who is the longest acting circuit court judge in history. There is Stuart Pixley, who is an attorney at Microsoft, who actually has 3 disabilities. Being a hearing impaired is just one. So there are, I totally appreciate the fact that it's important to look at all disabilities, and hopefully the longer form version of this will highlight all of them.
Deaf versus hearing impaired, though. Deaf versus hearing loss. I mean, that's
Deaf versus hearing loss,
That's
okay.
I think the point that Dimitri
Oh,
was
okay.
making.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Especially from young, if you became very lazy, it's one thing. But
Especially
it was
if
difficult
you became deaf as a
because
baby.
of communication. All disabilities
Because
that
of
you
communication,
mentioned,
because
they
all the
were
disabilities-
successful,
People that were successful
had one thing
had one thing
possible.
possible.
Communication became still easy for
It's still
them.
easy for them.
This is most important factor for success.
This is the most important factor for success.
mhm.
And as you can see, Dimitri has a real hard time overcoming his natural shyness and communicating.
Yes.
So thank you firstly. Is the caption showing up? Yeah. Okay. Something I'm thinking about from this presentation is the contradiction between acting as non-disabled as possible and disability as an advantage. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I know that at my job, my colleagues definitely rely on my ability to memorize things. But, it's also sort of in the future, well, right now I work with a lot other people who are on the spectrum or have other various flavors of disability. But I'm also thinking about how do you take an ability to memorize things or in my cases, pieces of content and grammatical rules. And then present it as non-disabled as possible. I'm thinking more about Sveta's point that maybe in some ways it's kind of let more of it in some ways hang out. I'm not ashamed of being asked as quote unquote aspie. And I'm just sort of thinking in some ways. Sometimes those two things, maybe for future presentations, tend to weigh one another out. Right now,
Sure.
it's much more, I know in my case, and I know for others, it's much more, using the various spectrum quirks
as an advantage. Yeah, that's a great point. I think, point well taken for future presentations. I think that the thing to focus on is not really whether there's shame involved. That wasn't the point of talking about that particular aspect, but it's mainly focused upon how others perceive our capabilities as people with disabilities. So it's not focused on what we think of, how we think of ourselves, and that's not the reason to hide a disability, but it's about what we practically think in the situation that other people are going to think about us because they have a disability and make a prejudgment.
Well said.
Any other questions?
Oh, I'm wondering, did you look at the attribute of resiliency, which I think individuals who've had challenges will develop in the course of their adaptation to their challenges. And resiliency is really
Did you look at
a
resiliency?
very important factor in terms of academic and corporate achievement and accomplishment. So I think that could be interesting.
Yeah.
And it's considered part of emotional intelligence. And actually, there are programs, evidence-based programs, developed by psychologists that can foster that. And our company is very interested in developing those programs in very unique platforms.
Great point. Resiliency is something that I think did come through. I'm not sure how I phrased it in the data set, but it is something, obviously, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for coming, Jack, and thank you everybody
Thanks a lot.
for your awesome questions and discussion.
Thanks,
We're
everyone.
at a half an hour left.
Thank you.